I never thought moving to Silverstone Ridge would feel like stepping onto the set of a psychological thriller. But that's exactly what it turned into after we had our first run-in with the HOA president. My wife Laura and I had moved into the neighborhood just a few weeks earlier, eager to start our new lives. We had dreams, big ones, of a peaceful, family-friendly place where we could settle down, train horses, maybe even start a family. We weren't looking for drama, and certainly didn't expect to become the center of a suburban scandal. The trouble started with our dog, Bella. She's a sweet, gentle German shepherd who wouldn't hurt a fly. But apparently her mere presence was enough to trigger Geraldine Prescott, the HOA president. Geraldine was the type of woman who wielded her position like a medieval queen issuing edicts about lawn height, acceptable paint colors, and the precise angle at which trash bins must be placed. The first complaint came within 24 hours of our moving in. Geraldine marched right up to our front door with a clipboard in hand and a permanent scowl on her face. "Your dog barked at me," she declared, as if Bella's single woof from behind. Our front fence was a criminal offense. Laura, ever the diplomat, apologized and promised to be more careful. But it didn't end there. A week later, we got a formal notice citing us for uncontrolled animal behavior. Bella had barked again, this time at a squirrel. Geraldine must have been lurking nearby with a decibel meter, because the complaint included the exact volume and duration of the bark. We laughed it off at first, thinking it was a one-time nuisance. But the complaints kept coming. Noise violations, unauthorized lawn decorations, improper trash can placement. It felt like we were under surveillance 24/7. Laura tried to reason. With Geraldine, even invited her over for coffee to discuss our differences like adults. Geraldine declined the invitation with a curt note suggesting we review the HOA handbook more thoroughly. It was clear she saw herself as the gatekeeper of suburban sanctity, and we were the barbarians at the gate. Things escalated when Geraldine accused us of running an unlicensed business because Laura was seen training a horse in our backyard. Never mind that we'd already cleared the activity with zoning and permits. Geraldine reported us to the HOA board, animal control, and even the local police. That was the first time Officer Brooks came into the picture. He was polite, almost apologetic, when he came to our door. Said he was responding to a noise complaint and a report of possible animal cruelty. Bella wagged her tail and licked his hand as he took notes. He left without issuing any citations, clearly seeing there was no problem. But Geraldine wasn't deterred. She doubled down, filing more complaints, escalating her rhetoric. The situation reached a boiling point one morning when Laura was out front with Bella, planting flowers. Geraldine came marching down the sidewalk, like she owned the pavement, and started shouting about leash laws and property lines. Bella, who was leashed and calm, barked once. That was enough for Geraldine. She pulled out her phone and called 911, claiming Laura was threatening her with a dangerous animal. Within minutes, police arrived, 2 patrol cars, lights flashing. Laura was calm, respectful, and utterly confused. Officer Brooks was among the responders and looked visibly uncomfortable as he asked Laura to step aside. Geraldine was putting on quite the show, clutching her pearls and describing Bella as a raging beast. The officers did their due diligence, asked questions, took statements. Bella sat obediently the entire time. Laura kept her composure, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. After what felt like an eternity, the officers apologized and left without taking further action. But the seed had been planted. Geraldine's smear campaign was in full swing. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes, warning neighbors about a potentially dangerous animal and urging them to report any suspicious activity. Social media posts popped up in the community group, all anonymous but clearly written by Geraldine or her allies. They painted us as troublemakers, rule breakers, even criminals. Laura decided enough was enough. She started documenting everything. Every complaint, every interaction. Every time Geraldine walked by our house glaring or taking photos, she compiled a dossier that would make an intelligence agency proud. But still, we tried to resolve things peacefully. Laura requested a meeting with the HOA board to present her case. The meeting was a circus. Geraldine dominated the floor, waving printouts and citing obscure bylaws. Laura remained poised, methodically refuting each claim with evidence. But it was clear the board was terrified of Geraldine. They nodded along with her accusations, ignored our documentation, and concluded by issuing us a formal warning. It was a slap in the face. Laura didn't say much afterward, just calmly packed up her files and walked out. That night, she barely spoke over dinner. Could tell she was strategizing, formulating a response that went beyond polite rebuttals. The next morning, she woke up early and disappeared into her office. Hours passed. When I finally peeked in, she was on a video call with someone in a crisp uniform. She ended the call, turned to me, and said, "It's time we leveled the playing field." What I didn't know then was that Laura had been quietly pulling strings behind the scenes, reaching out to contacts from her previous work. She had connections in law enforcement real ones, and she was about to use them. The next time Geraldine tried to weaponize the system against us, she was in for a shock, and that moment came sooner than expected. A few days later, Geraldine once again called the police, claiming Bella had charged at her and she feared for her life. This time, when Officer Brooks arrived, he had a different demeanor. Professional, yes, but also skeptical. Laura met him at the door, holding a folder. "Before you say anything," she said calmly, "there's something you need to see." She handed him the folder and waited. Inside were documents, timelines, complaint records, and video footage. Laura had installed cameras around our property, and the footage showed Bella sitting calmly as Geraldine approached, provoked, and staged her reactions. Brooks flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. "This is ... a lot," he admitted. "I didn't realize you weren't meant to," Laura replied, "but now you do." That conversation marked a turning point. Brooks promised to review everything and discuss it with his superiors. Geraldine must have sensed the shift because her tactics grew even more desperate. She filed a formal petition with the HOA to have Bella removed from the neighborhood. She rallied a few loyal neighbors to sign it, claiming public safety concerns, but Laura was ready. At the next HOA meeting, she brought a printed timeline, affidavits from supportive neighbors, expert testimony from a dog behaviorist, and video evidence. The board looked visibly uncomfortable as Laura calmly dismantled Geraldine's arguments. Even a few of Geraldine's allies began to squirm. When the vote came down, the petition failed by a wide margin. Geraldine stormed out of the meeting, but she wasn't done, not by a long shot. The very next morning, Laura received a notice summoning her to the local police station. A new complaint had been filed alleging that Laura had threatened Geraldine during the HOA meeting as Laura walked into the station. I felt a sense of dread. But when she emerged hours later, she was smiling. "Well," she said, "I think it's time we introduce them to Chief Carter." And just like that, the next chapter of our suburban saga began not with barking dogs or HOA bylaws, but with a badge, a title, and the full weight of justice. Yes, Officer Brooks. Chief Carter began her duties on Monday. "Did you not receive the departmental memo about the transition ceremony?" Laura smiled with the kind of patient understanding that supervisors use when dealing with subordinates who've just learned an expensive lesson. "I understand, Officer Brooks. HOA presidents can be persuasive," she said, with just enough emphasis on persuasive to make it clear she meant completely unhinged. "The important thing is that we use this as a learning experience about how manipulative individuals can weaponize law enforcement against innocent citizens." While Brooks struggled to process this career-ending revelation, Laura calmly asked to review the complaint history for Silverstone Ridge. Just a casual request that any police chief might make when she's been illegally arrested by her own department. As someone who'd spent years analyzing criminal behavior patterns, Laura had suspected Geraldine's little performance wasn't her first rodeo. She was right. The records that appeared on Brooks's computer screen told a story that transformed what had seemed like an isolated incident into something much more systematic and deeply disturbing. Over the past 20 months, Geraldine had contacted police 13 separate times, filing complaints that read like a catalog of petty grievances and manufactured emergencies. 2 cases stood out in particular. She'd reported a family's Sunday afternoon barbecue as a potential riot situation because she could hear people laughing in their backyard. She'd also called 911 to report disturbing criminal activity. When neighborhood children were playing soccer and cheering too loudly after scoring goals. Each complaint had required police response, wasting hundreds of hours of official time and resources while terrorizing innocent families. Officer Brooks. What we're looking at here isn't a concerned citizen reporting legitimate problems. Laura explained with the calm of someone who had spent years dealing with repeat offenders and chronic troublemakers. This is someone who's been systematically abusing emergency services to harass her neighbors, using police officers as weapons and personal vendettas. The clinical precision with which she analyzed Geraldine's behavior was impressive. What had seemed like random acts of neighborhood craziness became a clear pattern of deliberate manipulation and abuse of authority that would make any prosecutor's day. As the full scope of Geraldine's harassment became clear, Brooks looked like someone who'd just realized he'd been dancing to the tune of a master manipulator for months. Chief. I've responded to probably half of these calls personally, he admitted, clearly embarrassed by how icily he'd been used. I always thought she was just overly concerned about community standards. I never realized she was filing false reports. The education he was receiving about manipulation and abuse of authority was obviously painful, but also necessary. Laura stood with the kind of decisive movement that signaled the interview was over. Officer Brooks, I'm going home now to check on my husband and our dog, she said, her voice shifting from victim mode to law enforcement mode. As for Mrs. Prescott, she paused at the door, her eyes gleaming. She and I are going to have a very interesting conversation tomorrow morning. Back in the interview room, Officer Brooks opened his notepad with the precision of someone prepared for a long and detailed questioning session. Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Prescott, has made some serious accusations about threatening behavior and interference with official HOA business, said, trying to maintain professionalism. Laura sat calmly, no sign of stress or anxiety. Officer Brooks, before we discuss this morning's events, there's something I need to show you, she said, reaching into her purse slowly and deliberately. She placed her badge on the table. Brooks blinked. Then again, his face drained of color. Ma, single quotes, am, taught, Chief Carter. He stammered, realizing he'd just arrested his new boss based on the word of a woman, who probably called 911 when someone's grass grew too tall. He fumbled for his radio. The response from dispatch was immediate and devastating. Officer Brooks, Chief Carter began her duties on Monday. Did you not receive the departmental memo? I could practically see Brooks mentally writing his resignation letter. He had arrested his superior and missed the transition ceremony all because he believed Geraldine's soap opera performance. Laura smiled. That same understanding smile. HOA presidents can be persuasive, she repeated. But this is a learning experience. Brooks nodded frantically, grateful she wasn't demanding his badge and gun. Laura asked to review the complaint history again. As the files loaded, they told a story of systematic abuse that Laura had predicted all along. Over 20 months, Geraldine had filed 13 bogus complaints. From noise complaints over kids playing soccer to reporting a barbecue as a potential riot, her reports painted a picture of someone determined to harass her neighbors under the guise of law and order. This isn't a concerned citizen, Laura said. This is a chronic troublemaker, exploiting the system. Brooks, mortified, admitted he'd responded to many of them. I always thought she just really cared about the rules, he said. It's called weaponizing emergency services, Laura replied. As Brooks absorbed this painful lesson, Laura stood. I'm going to check on my husband and our dog. Tomorrow morning, I'll be having a very different kind of conversation with Mrs. Prescott. Her expression was unreadable. She and I are going to have a very interesting conversation tomorrow morning. When Laura walked through our front door that evening, I practically jumped out of my chair and rushed to embrace her, feeling like someone who'd just watched their spouse return safely from a war zone. Are you okay? What happened? How did you get them to let you go so quickly? The questions tumbled out of me faster than I could organize them. Driven by hours of helpless worry, Laura's calm smile and relaxed posture told me that somehow impossibly everything was going to be all right. "Dylan, there's something I need to tell you," she said, settling onto the couch with a quiet intensity. "I haven't been completely honest with you about my new job." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" 3 weeks ago, I was offered the position of chief of police," she said, watching my face carefully. "I accepted and officially started Monday. I didn't tell you because I wanted to see what kind of neighborhood we were dealing with." Before revealing my position, the words hit me like a shockwave. Suddenly everything made sense: her composed reactions, her quiet investigations, the absolute confidence with which she'd faced Geraldine's lies. "You're the chief of police," I echoed. Before she could respond, we heard the sharp click of expensive heels outside Geraldine's victory lap. She sauntered past our home with a smug swagger, clearly relishing what she thought was a triumph. But when she saw Laura standing calmly on the porch, her stride faltered. "Mrs. Carter," Geraldine called, trying to keep her voice composed. "Back from your little trip downtown?" I hope it was educational. Laura descended the porch steps with a quiet authority that made me shiver. "Mrs. Prescott, we need to have a conversation," she said. Her voice carried the tone of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love that," Geraldine laughed mockingly. "But I don't associate with people who threaten their neighbors." That's when Laura dropped the bomb. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Chief of Police, Laura Carter." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Geraldine's face twisted through disbelief, confusion, and panic. "That's impossible," she muttered. "You're just trying to intimidate me." "Hey." Laura calmly held up her badge, letting the official seal gleam in the light. "Feel free to call the station and verify." "I'll wait while you confirm with Officer Brooks that I missed the transition ceremony because I was sitting in an interrogation room." "Thanks to your lies," Geraldine's fingers trembled as she dialed. We heard her voice falter, then fall silent as Brooks confirmed everything. "Yes, ma'am. That's our new chief." Geraldine nearly dropped her phone. Neighbors peered from windows and porches. Mrs. Henderson, 2 houses down, openly filmed with her phone. The Johnsons whispered and pointed. The collapse of Geraldine's confidence was instant and complete. Her face turned pale, her posture wobbled. For the first time, she looked scared. "This is impossible. Set up," she muttered. But even she didn't believe it. Laura's next words came calmly, but they landed like a hammer. "Filing false reports is a serious criminal offense. Systematic harassment requires immediate intervention. I'll be visiting you at 9 a.m. Tomorrow, in my official capacity, suggest you consider your options very carefully." And at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, Laura walked up to Geraldine's front door in full uniform badge, gleaming, utility belt secured. The transformation was surreal. Geraldine answered in a bathrobe, hair a mess, eyes hollow with fear. "Chief Carter," she whispered. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Laura's tone didn't waver. "I'm here to discuss your behavior over the past 20 months, she said, laying a thick folder on the kitchen table. "We need a review. 13 false reports, harassment of multiple families, and yesterday's fabricated arrest attempt. How spectacularly your life just unraveled from your own choices," Laura began, her voice cool and unshaken. Geraldine stood stiff in her kitchen, barely managing a whisper. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about yesterday's events, Mrs. Prescott. I'm here in my official capacity," Laura said, pulling a thick folder from her bag and placing it firmly on the table. "This contains documentation of your pattern of behavior, 13 separate false police reports, harassment of multiple families, and the particularly egregious incident yesterday where you tried to have an innocent person arrested. Each word struck like a gavel in a courtroom. The file contained a story so thorough, so damning, that it turned vague suspicions into irrefutable legal consequences. There were detailed records of every false complaint, evidence of wasted police hours, and testimonies from neighbors who'd lived in fear of retaliation until now." Laura flipped through the pages slowly. "Let's look at some highlights, shall we?" One emergency call reported an unlicensed lemonade stand. Another, that the Petersons' lawn was 2 inches over regulation. That warranted a unit with a tape measure, a noise complaint for Basketball at 3 p.m., a 6-year-old's birthday party reported as a suspicious gathering. Garbage lids blown open, labeled as illegal dumping. Geraldine's jaw worked uselessly, trying to interrupt. But Laura's calm, professional cadence never broke. Mrs. Prescott. "This isn't a matter of misunderstanding," she continued. "This is criminal behavior. You've weaponized law enforcement for personal vendettas, and it ends now." Geraldine tried to push back. Those weren't false. I was protecting community standards. But her voice held no conviction. She sounded like a child making excuses after breaking a window. "You have 2 options," Laura said, closing the folder with finality. "You can resign as HOA president, relocate, and we handle this administratively, or I file formal charges. False reporting, harassment, abuse of services, and interfering with official investigations." It was the politest ultimatum ever delivered, and somehow more terrifying than a shout. Geraldine visibly wilted. Her knees buckled slightly. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "I just did," Laura said quietly over the following weeks. Everything changed. Geraldine resigned, put her house on the market, and vanished from Silverstone Ridge. The new HOA president was calm, reasonable, and suddenly, the flood of false emergency calls stopped entirely. Peace returned. On Geraldine's last evening, Laura, Bella, and I sat on the porch watching the sunset. For the first time in months, the air was still, and Bella lay calmly at Laura's feet. "So," I asked, smiling, "any more secrets I should know about?" Laura laughed and squeezed my hand. "No more secrets. Just a normal family in a normal neighborhood." The irony wasn't lost on either of us that it had taken a police chief to restore normalcy to our suburban street. But sometimes justice comes wearing a badge and with the authority to make consequences stick like superglue, you know? I reflected as the last rays of light faded from the sky. I'm starting to think that moving to Silverstone Ridge was the best decision we ever made, though I bet Geraldine would disagree wherever she ended up. The final lesson of our ordeal was both simple and devastatingly effective. Bullies and petty tyrants can seem powerful when unchecked, but in the end, they're cowards cloaked. An imaginary authority is playing at power until someone with real authority stands up, and when that happens, their illusion shatters faster than glass in a hailstorm. Sometimes, the best way to deal with a neighborhood Karen isn't appeasement or compromise. It's letting them discover that the person they're targeting has resources, backup, and consequences waiting right around the corner, as Bella barked playfully. At a passing squirrel, and Laura nestled into my arms, we both knew this story would become legend in our community. The tale of how the neighborhood HOA tyrant picked a fight with the wrong. Family Ann discovered karma wears a uniform and carries a badge, and if you've ever had to deal with a Karen in your own neighborhood, you already know how satisfying it is to watch justice arrive not in rage, but in uniform, with paperwork and authority no one can deny. Drop your own HOA horror stories in the comments below, because this saga is just one of many. We're only getting started. Like, share, and stay tuned.